Hello, my name is Antoinette, and I'm a current social work student at Morgan State University's online program for Masters of Social Work. Today, I want to talk about a very interesting yet complex concept that social workers are still trying to understand till this day. So it is not a clinical term that a lot of people use in terms of using this term on any kind of legal paperwork. In the United States, we recognize trauma as this plethora of things that occurred that could be stressful to an individual. Now, for my sake of today's presentation, I would like to talk about the difference between trauma and urban trauma. This is something that I had took an interest in because urban trauma comes with different layers. Now, to go back and talk about some history or some explanation, in the United States, we only recognize post-traumatic stress disorder. There are two types of post-traumatic stress disorder. The other one is CPTSD, aka complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, in America, we see that under one thing, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We do not recognize complex. Now, urban trauma is all about the complexity of a whole bunch of factors and situations that happened in people's lives. Now, I kind of want to narrow this down to talk about urban trauma and how it affects our youth, our urban youth, those living in inner cities and inner city neighborhoods or engaging in the inner city lifestyle that a lot of people talk about. Now, to begin, contemporary community and violence has been a public health crisis with urban youth, ethnic minorities, and also a lot of suffering for a lot of negative impacts that these people can go through due to all of these intentional acts of interpersonal violence. Now, violence can be seen and defined in many different ways. You have domestic violence and IPV, intimate partner violence. Now, those who are using the word domestic violence, that could be violence or any kind of trauma from anybody in the household or the people that you have grew up with. So domestic violence could be mother to child, sister to sister, cousin to sister, brother to brother. It does not matter. Now, intimate partner violence is when two people who are partners engage in violence towards each other. Now, abuse can take 5 different forms, but interpersonal violence is what people kind of use to describe in order to use that umbrella term trauma or domestic violence. Urban youth that are exposed to both or one or the other have a detrimental impact on their mental health. Growing up and seeing violence is such a hard factor to consider because not only can the violence happen in their home, it can also happen in their neighborhood, right? Kind of in that, instead of that micro level, it kind of goes into more of a macro level, the neighborhood. And that neighborhood isn't supported by resources, and there's not a lot of policies in regards to urban trauma. So this is a really complex and really complicated thing to kind of explain and kind of advocate for. We are missing a lot of research and a lot of literacy or literature in order to understand the detriments. So today I kind of want to talk about how multiple indicators suggest contemporary youth face alarming levels of violence, including homicide. Thus, this results in one of the top 3 causes of death of people ages 15 through 34 years old at a national level, according to the CDC in 2019. In addition to these ongoing violence-related mental health crises, youth exposed to any kind of traumatic stressors and community violence are more likely to suffer disproportionately from the socioeconomic and community unrest during this COVID-19 pandemic that just kind of came about. Now, 83% of inner city youth report experiencing one or more traumatic events. Therefore, there is a whole bunch of youth reporting trauma exposure, or a lot of youth in juvenile justice that experience the trauma. What we know as social workers is that it's kind of like a domino effect. When trauma is introduced and it's chronic, it could be a big detriment to the youth's life, or the way that they are going to live their life. So, for an example, if you were exposed to a lot of violence, this could be gang violence, drug violence. There is a lot of science in regards to how that can set up the person who was witnessing it. You do not have to experience trauma in order to have post-traumatic stress disorder. You can simply witness it. So statistics reveal the prevalence of family violence in the United States. This was coming from the United States Department of Justice. 27% of all violent crimes occur among adults and family members. Between 3.3 and 10 million children witness domestic violence yearly. Also, 20% of adult women have been physically abused by a male partner. So there is a lot of violence that can occur: sexual violence, sexual misconduct, sexual assault. There is a lot of things that can come about. So for favorable outcomes for families affected by trauma and urban poverty are highly dependent on the availability of access to treatment practices, especially trauma-informed care. I also want to go ahead and review a treatment plan for an adolescent who has experienced urban trauma. I broke it down to do different things. A long-term goal that I would like to see from that adolescent is an increased understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder came in the DSM in 1980, and that was a very, very little bit of information in order for us as a society to understand exactly what post-traumatic stress disorder is. There is a plethora of symptoms that come about after PTSD, which can look like depression, anxiety, panic disorder, agoraphobia. There's a lot of things that come about. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is an anxiety disorder. So a long-term goal is I want to increase that level of understanding of what it truly is. Therefore, this person doesn't think they're weird, they're alone, or they're just a bad person that experienced all these things. A short-term goal is for the youth that I would work with is being able to identify symptoms and sources of hurt or some kind of pain, whether it's intrusive thoughts, some flashbacks, trauma-related fears, and things like that. Secondly, I want to add a sort of depression into their treatment plan because depression is so huge and it's a big spectrum of symptoms. A lot of people do not recognize what depression is. It is a loss of pleasure. It is a loss of motivation. It's an overall generalization of experiencing loss. Now, there's a difference between grief and bereavement. A lot of people are grieving some things, like the childhood they never had, the parent they never had. A lot of the times I hear people talk about it's not what happened to me, it's about what didn't happen to me. So a lot of these times, a lot of people, especially our youth in inner city neighborhoods, they don't understand that they're experiencing depression because a lot of people think that, hey, you must hate life, you must have to have a level of suicidality or suicidal ideation in order to be considered depressed. But that's not always the case. So a long-term goal that I would have for an adolescent is that the patient will identify and gain insight into sources contributing to the depression and will demonstrate improved mood. A short-term goal that I would have for that adolescent is I would like that adolescent or youth or patient to verbalize feelings related to family conflicts at least 2 times per month. The thing about depression is that our neighborhood or our community is one thing, but domestic violence and IPV, interpartner violence in the household, could have a bigger effect than anything else because there is no safety outside and there is no safety inside of the household. So now this adolescent is having troubles finding safety and knowing the difference between what is safe and what is helpful and what is definitely unsafe and not helpful. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. That is just my presentation on urban trauma and what I would do to help an adolescent that is currently facing this. Thank you.